Every day, many professional drivers cross the U.S. borders without incident. For the new professional driver, however, the thought of delivering goods into another country might seem like a daunting task. Being aware of and knowledgeable about some of the processes and procedures can help make your border crossing experience smooth and relatively easy. Travel into Canada is relatively common for the professional driver. Because U.S. drivers are allowed to operate into Canada without restriction, entry into and operation throughout Canada requires adequate preparation and paperwork. To enter the country, Canada requires proof of identification and citizenship. This means carrying a current passport, passport card, your commercial operator's license, an enhanced driver's license, or a free and secure trade or FAST card. An enhanced driver's license provides proof of identity and U.S. citizenship, is issued in a secure process, and includes technology that makes travel easier. This type of license can be used for entering the United States from a foreign country through a land port of entry, in addition to serving as your license to drive. The FAST program is a trusted traveler agreement between the United States and Canada. Drivers that meet eligibility criteria are able to obtain a FAST card that is valid for a 5-year period. The FAST card may be used to meet proof of citizenship that's required when crossing into Canada and back to the United States. If you are a permanent resident of the United States but not a citizen, then you will be required to present proof of your immigration status and show your visa. Certain types of convictions that are considered misdemeanors in the United States may be considered serious criminal felony offenses in Canada. If a professional driver has a felony conviction in the United States, the driver may not be admitted into Canada. Through Canada's rehabilitation program, this denial of admittance may not be permanent. If you have been convicted of a crime considered to be a felony in Canada, you may be eligible for entry into Canada after 5 years from the end of your sentence. If you have a felony conviction and need to enter Canada for a short time on a very limited basis, a special permit may be issued by the Citizenship and Immigration Canada consulate offices in the United States, but this is not guaranteed. Certain personal items carried over the border into Canada must be declared to the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA. Personal items you must declare include tobacco, all animals, plants, and their products, explosives, fireworks, and ammunition, firearms and weapons. Note that most weapons, including switchblades and other knives, mace spray, brass knuckles, and tasers, are prohibited and may be confiscated at the border. And prescription drugs with a clearly identifying label. If possible, you should also carry a letter from your doctor indicating your prescription. Know and follow the rules and regulations of the country you are traveling in, as enforcement does not consider ignorance of these requirements as a valid reason for non-compliance. In Canada, professional drivers are prohibited from having alcohol in the cab of their vehicle under any circumstances. Other generally prohibited items include weapons such as mace and handguns, as well as illegal drugs. Before leaving for Canada, you need to ensure that your vehicle registration, applicable safety certificates, fuel tax registration, and permits are all in order. Carriers will usually provide the necessary credentials to their drivers, but it is your responsibility to make sure you have everything you need and it is current. You will also want to make sure your vehicle and load meet the vehicle size and weight limits for where you will be traveling in Canada. More information on sizes and weights will be discussed a little later in this course. While many border crossing locations are in operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, some border crossings in rural areas may have limited operating hours. Be sure to check with your intended border crossing office to ensure the office will be open when you arrive. Crossing the border into Canada requires patience and a general understanding of the paperwork and procedures required by the CBSA. If you have done your homework in these areas, your border crossing should be relatively painless. When you approach most border stations, you will find there are certain lanes specified for the various vehicles entering the station. Use the designated commercial lanes, regardless of how long they are, at the border crossing station. Watch for signs that will direct you to the proper areas. It is important to remember crossing into Canada is a well-established, systematic process. If you follow the signs and the directions of the officials at the border, your problems should be minimal. CBSA may inspect your cab and cargo for illegal drugs, weapons, plants, certain foods, such as fresh fruits and vegetables, and animals that are not permitted into Canada. They may also search for illegal aliens or undeclared passengers. Last, they may inspect your cargo to ensure what you are carrying matches the paperwork you have provided. The type of cargo you are hauling can determine what types of paperwork you will be required to submit at the border. Some shipments that are going to Canada are released or cleared by the CBSA at the border, and some shipments are released or cleared at warehouses or other inland locations. The way cargo is released can also change the type of paperwork needed to transport a shipment into and out of Canada. There are several different types of border crossing programs in which you or your carrier may be involved. Upon returning to the United States after your trip to Canada, you will be required to show identification, such as your CDL and proof of citizenship, your passport. You should already have these items available, as you needed them to enter Canada. If you are returning with freight, you will also be required to show proper credentials and paperwork for the freight, similar to what you needed when you entered Canada with a load. As referenced earlier, while operating in Canada, you need to be aware of some differences in the safety regulations as they apply to the professional driver. As in the United States, you need to be in compliance when operating in Canada. If you are driving south of the 60th parallel, you are allowed to drive 13 hours in a day or work shift, but you must stop driving after accumulating 14 on-duty hours in the day or work shift, or after reaching the 16th consecutive hour since your last 8-hour break. You must take 10 hours off duty in a day. This time does not need to be consecutive. Finally, you cannot drive without having at least 24 consecutive hours off duty in the preceding 14 days. At least 8 hours of off-duty time must be consecutive and precede the initial on-duty time in a day. The additional 2 hours of the total 10 off-duty hours required daily can be distributed throughout the day in blocks of no less than 30 minutes. Drivers may defer up to 2 hours of the mandatory 10 hours off-duty to the following day. If you encounter conditions such as snow, sleet, fog, or unusual road or traffic conditions on a run that could normally be completed in 13 hours, you are allowed up to an additional 2 hours of driving time to complete the run. The 14 and 16-hour rules still apply, and you will still have to take 8 consecutive hours of off-duty time. However, you can reduce the additional 2 required off-duty hours by the amount of your delay. To use this exception, you must not have known or been able to foresee the situation at the time you began your run. The reason for using the exception must be recorded on your log. Drivers operating a commercial vehicle fitted with a sleeper berth can accumulate their mandatory off-duty time in 2 separate periods. For a single driver south of the 60th parallel, neither period can be shorter than 2 hours. The total of the 2 periods must be at least 10 hours, and the off-duty time must be spent in the sleeper berth. You must stop driving after accumulating 13 driving hours, 14 on-duty hours, or 16 total hours when adding up the time before and after each of the 2 rest periods. Team drivers can also use the sleeper berth option, but each of the 2 rest periods must be at least 4 hours long, and the total of the 2 periods must be at least 8 hours. Team drivers must still obtain at least 10 hours off duty in a day. As with single drivers, you must stop driving after accumulating 13 driving hours, 14 on-duty hours, or 16 total hours when adding up the time before and after each of the 2 rest periods. Under Canada's rules, you must comply with either of 2 long-term limits known as Cycle 1 or Cycle 2. If you are following Cycle 1, you cannot drive after accumulating 70 hours of on-duty time during any period of 7 days. If you are following Cycle 2, you cannot drive after accumulating 120 hours of on-duty time in any period of 14 days, or 70 hours of on-duty time without having taken at least 24 consecutive hours of off-duty time. You may reset your current cycle and begin a new one, or switch between cycles, only if you take the following supplementary off-duty time. For Cycle 1, or to switch from Cycle 1 to Cycle 2, at least 36 consecutive hours. Or for Cycle 2, or to switch from Cycle 2 to Cycle 1, at least 72 consecutive hours. Once you have taken the required off-duty time, you may begin a new cycle. Your accumulated hours are set back to 0, and your driving hours begin to accumulate again. If you are driving north of the 60th parallel, you cannot drive after accumulating 15 hours of driving time, or 18 hours of on-duty time in a day or work shift, or if 20 consecutive hours have passed since your last 8-hour break. Upon reaching these limits, you must take at least 8 consecutive hours of off-duty time before driving again. You must take at least 8 hours of off-duty time each day. This time does not need to be consecutive. Finally, you cannot drive without taking at least 24 consecutive hours of off-duty time in the preceding 14 days. The adverse driving conditions allowance is the same as it is for drivers south of the 60th parallel. When driving north of the 60th parallel, single drivers operating a commercial vehicle fitted with a sleeper berth can obtain their mandatory off-duty time by accumulating the time in 2 separate periods. Neither period can be shorter than 2 hours. The total of the 2 periods must be at least 8 hours, and the off-duty time must be spent in the sleeper berth. You must stop driving after accumulating 15 driving hours, or 18 total hours when adding up the time before and after each of the 2 rest periods. Team drivers can also use the sleeper berth option, but each of the 2 rest periods must be at least 4 hours long, and the total of the 2 periods must be at least 8 hours. As with single drivers, you must stop driving after accumulating 15 driving hours, or 18 total hours when considering the time before and after each of the 2 rest periods. Under Canada's north of 60th parallel rules, you must follow either Cycle 1 or Cycle 2 to account for your on-duty time. If you are following Cycle 1, you cannot drive after accumulating 80 hours of on-duty time during any period of 7 days. If you are following Cycle 2, you cannot drive after accumulating 120 hours of on-duty time in any period of 14 days, or 80 hours of on-duty time without having taken at least 24 consecutive hours of off-duty time. The cycle reset is 36 hours for Cycle 1 and 72 hours for Cycle 2. This chart on screen shows the differences between the United States and Canada south of the 60 hours of service regulations. While operating in Canada, you need to be aware of Canada's daily log requirements. At the time of production, Canada has not yet mandated the use of electronic logging devices, or ELDs, but accepts their use in the country as long as the required information is available on the devices. If you are operating into Canada from the United States with an ELD, your carrier will need to ensure the device is compatible with Canada's requirements. Drivers may not have to log if they drive within an air mile radius of 160 kilometers, 100 miles, of their home terminal, and meet the following requirements. The driver must return to the home terminal each day to begin a minimum of 8 consecutive hours of off-duty time, and the employer keeps detailed time records for at least 6 months, showing for each day the duty status and cycle, the hour at which each duty status begins and ends, and the total time spent in each duty status. If any one of these conditions is not met, then a driver would be required to fill out a daily log. Canada requires a documented daily vehicle inspection of vehicles, which needs to be performed on a vehicle at least once every 24-hour period. Drivers are required to carry a copy of the daily vehicle inspection report, which may be no more than 24 hours old. The United States requires a documented post-trip inspection report only when vehicle defects or deficiencies are discovered. The United States and Canada have a reciprocal agreement in place for trip inspection reporting. A condition of the reciprocal agreement requires a U.S.-based driver to carry his or her previous day's post-trip inspection when traveling in Canada, defects or no defects. Be sure you have proof of a post-trip inspection before entering Canada, even if no defects or deficiencies are discovered on your vehicle. Though U.S. regulation only requires that a DVIR be completed when no defects or deficiencies are discovered, Canada requires that the last day's DVIR be carried on the vehicle, defect or no defect. This means that you need to have a completed DVIR on your vehicle, even if you did not find any defects or deficiencies on your vehicle. For-hire operating authority in the United States is granted by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA. In Canada, however, a federal for-hire operating authority does not exist. Instead, Canada-based carriers, both private and for-hire, must obtain a safety operating authority called a Safety Fitness Certificate from their respective base province or territory. In most Canadian jurisdictions, the requirements for a carrier to obtain a Safety Fitness Certificate only apply to Canada-based carriers. However, 2 provinces, Ontario and Quebec, both require U.S.-based carriers to obtain a safety registration within those provinces. In Ontario, it is called the Commercial Vehicle Operator Registration, and in Quebec, it is called the Registration Identification Number. Both registrations allow Ontario and Quebec to track the safety performance of U.S. carriers operating in the provinces. While operating in these provinces, you may have to produce credentials showing that your carrier is registered under these programs. Because the International Fuel Tax Agreement, or IFTA, and the International Registration Plan, or IRP, apply to the lower 48 states and 10 Canadian provinces and the District of Columbia for IRP, you must have proper IFTA and IRP credentials when operating in Canada. For IFTA, you will have a copy of the IFTA license in your cab and IFTA decals on both sides of your cab. For IRP, you will have a cab card listing your vehicle's registered weight in all of the states and provinces. The carrier will likely provide you with all necessary documentation and permits. Canadian enforcement officers may ask to see your IFTA and IRP credentials at any time. You may provide proof of your IFTA and IRP credentials by presenting an electronic image of the IFTA license and IRP cab card on a phone, tablet, or laptop. The vehicle size and weight requirements in Canada are different than the requirements in the United States. In Canada, the vehicle size and weight requirements are established by each jurisdiction. For example, the size and weight requirements in British Columbia may not be the same as the requirements in Ontario. In order to create uniformity among the Canadian jurisdictions, all jurisdictions agreed to a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, on vehicle size and weights. You can see these limitations listed on the screen. Even though the MOU is in place, a Canadian jurisdiction may adopt less restrictive size and weight limits for roads within their jurisdiction. Refer to the individual jurisdiction's size and weight regulations for more information. Canada uses the metric system, which is unlike the United States, where the English system is used. To convert a metric measurement to an English measurement, simply multiply by the English conversion equivalent. For example, to convert 80 kilometers to miles, 80 times 0.621 equals 49.7 miles. Or, to convert 20 meters to feet, 20 times 3.28 equals 65.6 feet. Canada uses degrees Celsius to represent temperature. To convert Celsius temperatures to Fahrenheit, multiply the degrees Celsius by 1.8 and add 32. For example, to convert 25 degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit, multiply 25 degrees Celsius times 1.8 plus 32 equals 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Canada has its own currency, and the denominations are similar to United States currency. However, Canada is different in that they do not use pennies, and a single dollar is a coin referred to as a loonie. Canada also has a $2 coin that's referred to as a toonie. Paper money starts with the $5 bill. The value of a Canadian dollar compared to a US dollar is different. Depending on many economic factors, a Canadian dollar may be worth less or more than a US dollar. When exchanging US currency into Canadian currency, an exchange rate is set. The exchange rates fluctuate often. When entering Canada, you may be able to exchange US dollars for Canadian dollars near the border. If you do not wish to exchange money upon entering Canada, some retailers near the border may accept U.S. currency, or you can use a credit card. Before doing so, first ensure that your card may be used in a foreign country. Note that your credit card provider may charge a foreign transaction fee to use the card in a foreign country. Also note, speed limit signs in Canada are posted using the metric system. Be sure to remember that 100 kilometers per hour is actually 62 miles per hour. You should now be able to Discuss general requirements for crossing the Canadian border. Describe the process used to cross the border into Canada and back into the United States. And list general differences between the U.S. and Canada when it comes to compliance issues, including hours of service, daily vehicle inspections, and vehicle sizes and weights. Now it's time to take the course exam. This exam includes 10 questions. Be aware, if you close the exam before finishing, your answers will not be saved. You may take this exam more than once. Your highest score will be reported. To begin the course exam, select Next.